today, which I will be discussing and interacting with students, is like the newer scope of clinical research, which has emerged, and especially in during this COVID time, like many of us who had even the normal public must have come across like phases of clinical trials, ethical concerns, and especially this COVID, I was tracking since its beginning actually in year like March 2020. So I'm following it since then. And during this time, we had seen a lot of ethical concerns which has emerged. And I'll be discussing all those challenges during my course of presentation. And as I, okay, Shivani, I think some disturbance is there.
Just a minute, sir.
Yes.
Just mute other participants. Yes, sir.
Okay, so I will be starting up with like many of the students are very new to this PharmD profession, and many of you will be interested in knowing that what role you are going to play in this industry in the near future, in the next 3 years, like how your teaching should be framed in such a manner so that the industry should accept you as a young researcher. So one thing all of us has to accept that in PharmD curriculum, it was launched by Pharmacy Council of India in year 2008. And if we see since 2008, because I'm teaching this particular course, there is no update yet in the syllabus. So what we do in Manipal for this last 15 years, what we had did was we try to update ourselves with respect to the national guidelines. So I will be updating you on all these aspects, like how to make yourself more competitive enough in this market and how to catch up with the other part of the India. So let's start with my topic. So the topic is scope of biomedical ethics and clinical research, current trends and future perspectives. So before we start, so I will be giving you a good amount of history. So what went wrong in the past and how we are going to prepare ourselves for the future. And we will take some example from even COVID also. So when you will hear the word ethics, because for the next 3 years, because always remember as a clinical pharmacist, we all are dealing with patients. And when we deal with patients and when we do research in patients population, ethics is the first things which comes into our mind. Because whatever we do, we have to follow some ethical standards which are being laid down by Government of India and which are being laid down by some international organizations like WHO or many other organizations which are working in this area. So ethics, when it comes, is not a natural science, it's a creation of human mind. And the past experience makes us learn more and more about ethics. So ethics definitions keeps on changing and the new standards keeps on upgrading itself. So however, the new research and new methodologies comes into picture. So we see the earlier time, the mortality and ethics is a practice of medicines were preached. But in today's world, we see the relation of medical practice. It's more of a business oriented. So the care practice is still there, but it's more becoming like a contractual relation between a patient and a doctor. Okay, so that's where the standards of ethics will go and more challenging it will become. So as we can see, the main principle of ethics is do not harm. So do no harm is the basic principle. So whatever you do in clinical research, so whichever personals are involved, whether it is pharmacy, whether it is nursing, or whether it is doctors, so whenever you are dealing with patients, so always remember do no harm policy. So by knowingly or unknowingly, we should not harm anyone out there because it's against the ethical standards. So since 30th century, we have our olden system of medicines, which is being practiced like Siddha, then you have Chakra Samiti, and then Hippocrates Oath is there, and many other. The modern ethics and science started in early, I will say, 19th century. So especially we have a lot of learning experiences where the modernization of today's clinical trials had shaped itself. Even before that, also many unethical practices must have been. But during this World War I and World War II time, there are a lot been challenges which the world has faced. So the first challenge which or the landmark document, I will say, in the history of clinical trials is the Nuremberg Code of 1947. So as we know that during the time of Hitler, the German army, they had done a lot of pseudoscientific experiments which you can say that they were unhuman. And in today's world, you cannot do these type of experiments. So these are the pictures which has been taken from the past. And you can see over here, the German physicians are being tried in the court of law and for their inhuman experiments. So here you can see the Nazis' human experiments. You can see over here the prisoners which are being sacked and jam-packed into the racks, and they are waiting for their turn to be participate in some clinical trials. The word you must have heard that many times the governments had used that do not use human population as guinea pigs for clinical trials. So the word guinea pig and using humans for unethical experiments, as you can see, this image is self-explanatory in that. So over here, what challenges they had faced is the German has conducted a lot of these experiments in concentration prisoners camps without the patient consent. So all these prisoners who were a part of these clinical trials, they were actually never asked about their permission or their consent. They were actually forced to participate in all these clinical trials. So nowadays you can see that a lot of vaccine clinical trials are happening. But for these vaccine trials, you need human volunteers. But nowadays, when we take human volunteers, we do take consent, that is known as patient information consent. So consent becomes a very, very important aspect of any clinical trial nowadays. But in those days, in the past, the patients or the prisoners, the consent was not taken, they were forced. And most of these prisoners who participated in these trials in German experiments, they were either permanently crippled or they were dead at the end of the experiments. So the 1947 Nuremberg Code is perhaps the most important document in the history of mankind when it comes to clinical trials. And it was the first code to ensure the rights of patient and establish the concept of voluntarily informed consent. So the terminology of voluntarily informed consent came from here. So as a young researcher, always remember, because many of you will be doing your research projects in 5th year, or when you are in 6th year, you will be doing some extra research projects. And all these research projects... Okay. Dr. Okay.
Participants, please mute yourself. I can't see the participant who is talking.
Okay, I think...
So sorry, sir.
No problem, no problem. Yeah. Okay, okay, fine. So I will start then. So yeah. All these participants, like nowadays, always remember all these participations, because during your research project, you have to get your ethical approval. For example, if you're doing an observational study, you are following a patient and you are doing any sort of research study in the wards among patient group for any disease. So before you start your, you can say research, the first thing what you have to do is you have to take your ethics approval for the research projects. And then not only that, once you had got your ethics approval, you even have to register your research projects with CTRI. So CTRI is nothing but it's Clinical Trial Registry of India. So once you have these both approvals, then only you can start your research projects. And in research projects, the most important thing is enrollment of your patients in your research projects. So for enrolling your patient, you have to take voluntarily informed consent from the patients so that they had understood your clinical trial, whatever or the trial you are doing, and they are willingly to participate in your trial. So that is where the concept of voluntarily consent comes into picture. And nowadays in 2021, this century, we do have very important things of voluntarily consent. Even in clinical trials, if any company is not following these ethical standards, the regulatory bodies actually can suspend or permanently terminate the clinical trials if the investigator is not following the procedure of voluntarily informed consent. Even during this COVID time, if you had gone through the news, there are actually concerns, even after all these guidelines are in place, we had come across some news that where the participants were not actually aware about their participation in the clinical trials. Because during this clinical COVID time, we had seen there is something known as fast track approval process. Normally, a clinical trials will be there for around 10 to 12 years for one drug to get approved for a market. Okay, so it takes almost 10 to 12 years down the line to get one approval for any molecule. But during this pandemic, because as it is an emergency, so what happened is the government fast track all these process. Okay, and the priority is given to the vaccine research. So they will get fast track approval, and within 1.5 years, you can get vaccinations approved in the market. But these fast track approvals comes with a challenge. So a lot of ethical challenge, that's what we were talking. So it can come during this due course. Okay, so we will be talking more on these challenges of accelerated clinical trials. So these were the experiments which they had conducting, like experiments on twins they had conducted in German experiments. So what they will do is they will take a dye and they will put in one twin's eye and they will wait for the other twin to see how they react. And many other type of experiments they are doing in twin experiments. So over here you can see experiment like freezing experiments. So over here, what they were doing was they will take a prisoner and they will dip him in ice cold water and they will see how the body reacts to ice cold water and hypothermia until the patient die. So over here you can see two physicians dipping a prisoner in ice cold water. And over here you can see another experiment like malaria experiment. So in those days there was no specific drug to be used for malaria. So what they used to do was they will take some 1,000 prisoners and they will make sure that everyone get infected with malaria, and then they will try different drugs on these prisoners. So not only that, they had done some experiments on poison gas experiments, mustard gas experiments, seawater experimentation. So poison gas is like they will put the prisoners in the mustard gas chambers and they will see how the burns which are or the toxicity associated with this poisonous gases, how the person body reacts. And seawater experiments, like they will make sure that the prisoners are only fed with seawater and they will see how the body reacts to if only the prisoners are only taking seawater. So these are some of the unscientific experiments which had happened in the past. And if anybody is interested, as you are all young researchers, you can go down and search in the web and you can actually read these books which are have a very importance in the history of mankind, like Trials of War Criminals and Nazis Doctors and Nuremberg Code. So those who are in fifth year, you must be studying all these things as a part of your curriculum in clinical trials. So then another type of study which is actually very shocking to the world community and it went unnoticed for around 40 years. So this study actually started in US under the Public Health Authority of US that was funded by US government itself. And this study was known as the Turkesky study of untreated syphilis in Negro males, 1932 to 1972. So over here, you can see a caption that you got the bad blood, the horror of Turkish syphilis. So this was a landmark image which I had took from the, you can say, archivals of medical history. So what went wrong in this particular thing was the syphilis victim. First thing was they were Negro males and they were ethical minority group and they were treated with syphilis, which went unnoticed for around 40 years. Okay, and this is a New York Times heading, like how it came into the picture of everyone. So this was the longest observational study in the history of mankind, and it started in early 1920s. The syphilis was a terrible disease, and there was no known cure for it. So that's where it all began. So they took around 600 black men in this particular study, and always please note that these patients were not informed about their disease condition. The patient informed consent was not taken, and they were misguided. These patients were never told that they are suffering from syphilis. They were just told that they are having bad blood. So that's where the problem starts, because misinformation was given to them. So this bad blood was used, very popular term in those days. And the patients didn't receive a proper treatment for management of syphilis. And as we know that in early 1940s and 50s, the penicillin became the drug of choice of treatment of syphilis. Even after the launch of penicillin, these patients were never given option to get treated even with penicillins. And this study was originally approved for 6 months, but it went up to 40 years. So you can see there is a breach of contract which they had conducted. And the population which was selected were African American, so vulnerable group. So what the message this particular, so over here you can see a physician giving a patient, taking a blood sample during this Turkish syphilis study. So this has been taken from the, you can say, records of medical science. So this was the actual picture of the study which was taken. And the last survival of this particular study, so they had fought this case in US, And finally, you can see over here the Bill Clinton, the US president, past US president, and he has actually come forward and he apologized on behalf of US government to the survivors of the victims of Turkish syphilis study. So what message we take it from Turkish study and how it impacts today research? So first thing, we had seen that they had not taken the consent, first thing. So in today's trial, we have to take consent. Please note, that is the biggest breach in case if we don't take consent and we just enroll patients in our study. So that is the biggest breach of, you can say, contractual agreement between a researcher and a participant. So we do have to take a consent. Not only that, in this study, we learned that the patients were given misinformation. In today's world, we know that whenever we are taking any patient, we have to give the actual facts and figures. And whatever the documents we are submitting to the regulatory bodies, they should be up to date and with maximum possible data, whichever is available, the safety and efficacy data which we are having. So for example, you must be seeing that during this COVID trials, because it's a fast track trials and the new safety and efficacy data is being generated regularly. So what happened is, once the new safety data is available, we have to submit this data to the regulatory body, and then they will see that whether the approval has to be given further or not given further. Many of you will be remembering, I think in month of March or April this year, when Covishield was just approved and it was in few months of its launch, there were rumors coming from European nation that many European countries has actually put on hold for Covishield, for a temporary hold was put on. Anybody remember that? Anybody has any clue on this? In early March and April, there was a halt on Covishield. So why there was a halt was because there were new reports on safety concerns about clot formations with this particular vaccination. So what regulatory body asked was to provide some new data on the safety parameters from the company, and then they analyzed the risk and benefit ratio. So it was like the risk associated with vaccination about this particular clot formation is actually very less when it compares to the benefit what the mass population will get when it comes to the life saved. So they had calculated the risk benefit ratio, and the vaccine was again launched in the market and the ban was lifted out. So same thing, we know that whenever a study is going on, it's not like you cannot stop it. In case if during the study there are safety concerns, the trial should be stopped at that given point of time itself. It should not be allowed to continue. So in that syphilis study, the study went up to 40 years, even there was a huge risk involved. And the third aspect, what we learned was they had targeted a vulnerable population, that is a Negro males, which was an ethnic minority group. So in today's world, whenever you are doing research in your 4th years, 5th years, or 6th years, there is a section of inclusion and exclusion criteria that which population you are going to include and exclude. So always remember a vulnerable group of population, okay, which can have can be exploited very easily. Either they are poor or like, for example, children's or orphanage people or people working in medical industries, okay, all or war prisoners. So these are all vulnerable populations, pregnant women, okay. So whenever you are taking any of these groups, so you have to be extra caution always. And you have to justify that why you are going to recruit vulnerable population in your study population. So that is what the learning experience we got it from Turkish study. And another aspect what we learned is that we have to follow the timeline, whatever we had got approval in the beginning. So for example, if your study is meant for 12 months, okay, your research project, you have to follow the timeline. It's not like that you can just keep on extended even without approval. So nowadays, in today's time, any trial or any study which I am doing in my setup over here. So for example, if I had got approval for 12 months and I now think, okay, I need approval for another 6 months. So I have to reapply my approvals to ethics committee so that they can give me again approval. Please note, any amendments or any changes if we are making in our protocol has to get a prior approval from IRB-IC committee, that is Institutional Review Board, which reviews your protocol. So you have to get approval and then you can continue your research study. So that's why these past studies are very important. And based on Turkish study, Belmont report was given by US National Commission for Protection of Human Subject. And these are the three principles which was laid down, and these are valid even till today. So the principle of respect, principle of beneficence, and principle of justice is in place. So these are the gold standard principles, which is even today valid. Then we have sulfonamide tragedy, which was a very important, especially as we know, India is one of the biggest generic market out there. So what went wrong with sulfonamide in those days in early 1930s or 1940s? So the taste of raspberry becomes a taste of death for many children out there in the past. So sulfonamide, as we know, it was considered one of the miracle molecules in World War One and World War Two times. So, but the only problem was it was available in powder formulation and used by, you can say, soldiers to sprinkle on their wounds to take care of this streptococcal infection. But this was not available in solution form. So that it, but because it cannot be given, because it's not available in solution, it cannot be given to the children's. So what happened in 1937, there was a chemist named Harold. So what he did was he used diethyl glycol to dissolve this particular sulfonamide, and he prepared this elixir, that is elixir sulfonamide, by using diethyl glycol. And this diethyl glycol is actually a freezing agent, which is a deadly poison. And what happened that this particular chemist failed to test before he launched this molecule in the market. So he didn't test the safety aspect prior to the marketing approval. And this was sold in the market, and many children who had taken this particular elixir, which has been put with raspberry flavor, many kids had died of kidney failures after taking this. So that's where your 1938 Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act came into picture. So US government has actually taken initiative, and that's where US FDA Acts came into picture, which says that it's very important for any companies to perform animal safety test on the proposed new drugs and submit the data to FDA before being allowed to market their product. So that's where your preclinical testing comes into picture. So before you sell your molecule or test your molecule in human population, you have to do animal studies before it gets approved in the market. Then another very important past history is thalidomide. So that's where your pharmacovigilance and drug safety comes into picture. So for any molecule, it's very important to go for monitoring of adverse drug reaction. Always remember, there is no drug without a side effect. Every drug will have one or the other side effect. Only thing is, as a clinical pharmacist, one of the very important role what we have to do is reporting clinical trials. Okay, reporting adverse drug reaction, which are being reported in clinical trials or during your routine practice. So it's very, very important to follow up with all these side effects. So thalidomide was one of the drugs. Over here, you can see many kids were born with flip-like limbs. This is known as phocomelia. You must be aware about it. And this tragedy happened in around 1960, where this thalidomide was actually marketed in 1957 in West Germany. And it was given as a sedative drugs for morning sickness in pregnant women. Okay. And this drug was available over the counter, and it was sold in many parts of Europe and West Germany. And soon after this drug was launched and over the counter drug was available, nearly 5 to 7,000 kids in that particular region were born with phocomelia or missing limbs or flip-like appearance. Okay, malformations of limbs were reported, and only 40% of children actually survived that particular tragedy. And in US, because of thalidomide disaster, actually it never reached US because there was a lady drug officer in US which stopped the marketing of thalidomide in America, in US in those days. And she was awarded with Presidential Award Medal. And in US, because of this disaster, the Harris Amendment Act came into picture, and which says that introduction of drug manufacturer to prove the efficacy and safety of their molecule. That is where the concept of safety monitoring and post-marketing surveillance comes into picture. And then finally, the world community, after all these disasters and in the past experience, what we had taken, finally, the world community came together and they started for making a note of Declaration of Helsinki, in which they had stated many roles. And one of the best part of declaration is it keeps on updating regularly. So over here, you can see it is being updated in 1975, 83, 89, 96, 2000, 2008. And even in 2000, you can say 12, it has been updated. And the latest approval, I think it will come in year 2022. The approval is on verge. So this particular declarations give for the very first time the guidelines for the world community to be followed for doing any human experiments. Okay, it's like a guidance document for all of us. So this is the picture of signing of Declaration of Helsinki, which is there. And this declaration gives 3 or 4 main aspects like safeguarding research subject, and informed consent is important, and minimizing the overall risk, and adherence to the approved research plan or protocol. So these are the 4 main pillars of Declaration of Helsinki. So always remember, whenever we do medical research, the patient safety comes first. Always remember, okay? The research comes second. The safety of patients comes first. In case if you think that, okay, the patient safety is compromised, you make sure that the patient should not continue participating in your trial. He should be withdrawn from the study in case if his safety is compromised. Another very important aspect which you have to remember is in all these things, what we had done is documentation practice. For example, as a young researcher, whatever you go and do in your wards, for example, whenever you note down any patient profiles or whenever you are doing thesis, it's very important to have a good documentation practice. Always remember, in clinical trials, there is one very good saying: if you had not documented, that means it is not done. So documentation is very important. Don't keep it pending for the future that you will do it later. So whatever you are doing in clinical trials, in your research projects, you have to document it properly for the audit purpose. And any given point of time, it can be audited. In, you can say, today's world, we can audit that. And nowadays, the regulatory bodies over here, you can see the Icmr plays a very, very important role in formation of these guidelines. So for all you young researchers, these are the guidelines documents which you have to go through and you have to read it. So the latest document is by Icmr 2017 guidelines, which gives about biomedical ethical research. I will show you the website also. So this is a guidance document which gives you a very good insight into it. And in India, you will be very surprised to know that few years back, around 4-5 years back, in India, all the clinical trials were actually stopped by Supreme Court of India because of lot of regulatory irregularities in India at the regulation, at the DCGI level or at the other levels, or at the approval process of clinical trials in India. So Supreme Court came very heavily on DCGI and other regulatory bodies, and actually the clinical trials were put on halt for a good amount of time till they get the clarifications and rectifications by the body. So in India, we can see there are a lot of violations which had happened in the past, like some pig heart experimentations had happened, like genetic research in Indian vulnerable population funded by NIH, and some projects which were not approved by Government of India has actually carried out, and there was a lot of media attention which came into limelight about these violation and unethical trials which were going on in India. And over here, you can see Supreme Court, there was a PI which was filed in India about unethical clinical trials, exploitation of vulnerable population, compensation issues, and growing activism. So I will tell you, like, I started my career in year 2006 in Manipal as a master's student, and I got an opportunity to work in clinical trials as a scientist in year 2007. That was a time in 2005 and 7, I will still remember, when the clinical trial had just started booming in India. And there were very few companies which were doing these clinical trials. The regulations were not that strict. And when we used to interact with a lot of our colleagues which are working in this industry, so we understood that there are a lot of loopholes and a lot of limitations in the existing guidelines, okay? Especially when it comes to auditing, monitoring, reporting, documentation, and many other experiments. Like, for example, like some of my friends used to tell that there was an investigator who was caught actually that for producing some forged document that he was carrying out clinical trials without including even a single patient. So the clinical trial was just happening on papers with not actual patients. So that type of illegal practices used to happen in the past. But nowadays, the regulatory bodies are very, very strict. The audit process is very strict. And to your surprise, there is a new guidelines which is launched in India. So I will just show you that. Okay, so this is the book which I was telling you. This is the National Ethical Practice. And this is the new guidelines which is launched by Government of India in 2019. So as a PharmD students, please note that as I told in my starting of my lecture, the PharmD syllabus is of 2008. It is not yet updated till now. There is an expectation that you may get updated syllabus by next year. In 2022 we are expecting a upgradation of PharmD syllabus or curriculum very soon. But for all you, because we cannot wait for the regulatory bodies to update, so as a researcher, as a new, you can say PharmD students, how we can upgrade our knowledge. So this is the guidelines which every one of you should know or remember by heart. Okay, this is a 2019 guidelines. The name is the New Drug and Clinical Trial Rule 2018. So this is the guidelines launched by Government of India, which gives you all the new aspects of clinical trials in India. Especially in India, the patient compensation policy was very poor. So many of the patients were actually exploited when it comes to clinical trial related injury. So in this particular guidelines, so there is a specific formula which is given for clinical trial compensation, that how much we have to compensate to the patients. So I will just show you some of the websites, and then I will get some interactive session. Like I will start interacting and share some of my experience. So for all you young researchers, these are some of the websites. Shivani, I hope it is visible, right? These websites are visible.
Yes, sir, they are visible.
Okay, so as a young researcher, all of you should visit these websites and try to explore these websites, because many of these informations are available online nowadays. And the more you explore, the more you get or try to understand that how the things works in India. So this is the very first site that is by CDSCO, that is Central Drug Standard Control Organization. So all these 3 years, when you start from your PharmD fourth year, fifth year, and sixth year, you should explore this, because CDSCO gives you recommendations about clinical trials in India. So over here, you can see under clinical trial section, you have ethics committee, you have global clinical trials, you have serious adverse events, you have bioavailability, bioequivalent studies, then you have different type of drug approval process, like what are the new investigational drugs, new drugs available, and fixed dose combinations which are approved in India, and what are the different vaccinations which are getting approved in India. Then you have medical diagnostics, and all these things will be available in CDSU website. The second very important website is ICMR. This is ICMR National Ethical Guidelines Platform. So ICMR gives you guidelines on biomedical ethical research. Not only that, during this COVID time, ICMR was very active, and they came up with guidelines specific to COVID research. So for example, over here, you can see in 2020, they came up with the guidelines on National Ethical for Ethics Committee Review, Biomedical and Health Research during COVID-19 pandemic, and SOP templates for ethic review of biomedical and health research during COVID-19 pandemic. So why these regulatory bodies come up with these new guidelines? I still remember during the first outbreak in Europe, in Italy, and some other parts of Europe, when the vaccinations was not there and the hospitals were overburdened with the patients, because in Europe, in the first wave, whichever patients get COVID, he was admitted in the hospital, whether he is having mild, moderate, or severe symptoms. Because of that, what happened was the hospitals were overloaded with the patients, and those patients which actually requires ventilation or which actually requires bed, they were actually didn't get the bed because of lack of facilities, because of sudden surge in COVID-19. So in Europe, if you go via literature, the ethical challenge what the physician faced, because the number of IC units were limited, number of oxygen cylinders were limited. So the physicians or the investigator had a challenge that which patient should be allowed to take oxygen and which should not be allowed to take oxygen, depend on their age, depend on their comorbid conditions, and based on many other factors. So they were actually, many patients were actually not given oxygen based on the ethical concerns which arises during these emergency conditions. And in India, during the second wave, we had came across, I think, almost similar challenge which Europe has faced in the first phase. That is number of beds, which patient to be given bed and which should not be given bed, or who should go under home isolation, Okay, who should be given ventilation, who should be given oxygen. So these are the challenges we do face in pandemic time, and we have to be prepared for all these challenges. So ICMR takes off all these regulatory bodies and ethical challenges. And this is the document which I was talking, 2017 document, which is available. So over here, you can see they gives you a different aspects of challenges. So as a young researcher, kindly note down of this particular thing. So over here, payment to the participants, compensation policies, conflict of interest, community agreements, and many other aspects will be there. Then the other very important website, which all of you should know, is these are the two websites. That is Clinical Trial Registry of India, as I was telling. So especially those who are doing their fifth year research projects, I think last 4-5 years back, Government of India has made it mandatory. For example, if you are doing an observational prospective study or an interventional prospective study, it's very important for all of you to first get. So I will just tell you the procedure of how we do research projects in Manipal and what procedures you may also follow in your setup, because slowly we have to adapt to the national standards. So the first thing is you have to make a protocol, which is as per new clinical trial 2019 guidelines or as per ICH E6 guidelines. So there is a structure format given in these guidelines of how to prepare a protocol. Or in case if you have a local IRB or IC committee, ethics committee of your hospital or of your college, they may be giving some sort of platforms or some templates to make a protocol. So once your protocol is ready, it's reviewed by your research guides. It has to be submitted to the ethics committee. So ethics committee will take their own time, and they generally take around 15 days to 1 month time to get their suggestions and approvals for your research projects. So once you get your approvals from local IRB, IC, you have to submit your proposal to CTRI website. That is this one, which you're seeing on my screen. In this particular website, all the clinical trials, whether it is a commercial clinical trials by a pharmaceutical companies or as a academic clinical trials, all these trials has to submitted on this particular website. And CTRI will issue you one number, which is a unique number for your clinical trials. For example, I will show you. For example, if I want to search, and not only that, any researcher, if you are interested in any other areas, you can actually search the clinical trials over here. For example, if I'm interested in, I will just put COVID because it's the hottest topic over here. And just I will put this one. So you can see all over India, which all companies, which all institutes, which all researchers, which all academic institutes are doing what type of research. So you can get at one shot all these things in this platform. Okay. So over here, you can see I just put COVID. So over here, you can see these are the CTRI numbers. So this is the unique number. Then you have the title of the research project and then the type of study and the recruitment status, whether the recruitment is done or not. And over here, you can, if you go here, just 1 minute. So over here, you can see the location. So Icmr College, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, PGI Chandigarh, Aster, and many other. So you can, if you go down, you can search your own institute in case if you had applied your research project. But it is mandatory by law. If you are doing a prospective study, you have to register. So without CTRI number, you cannot actually enroll even a single patient. But it is slowly and slowly the education institutes are adapting to the system, okay? Because you cannot recruit any patient without this number, the first number what they had given, okay? And any amendments which you are making in your protocol has to be uploaded in this particular website itself. Now the next question is, in case if I'm interested in globally, what trials are going on? Because as a young researcher, the first question comes to your mind is, in which research I should go? So it's very, okay, for example, if I'm interested in diabetes area, so I want to see what all research clinical trials are going in diabetic area or COVID area or cardiovascular research areas or asthma or any other. So I will go to clinicaltrial.gov. It's a website which is controlled by NIH, that is National Institute of Health, US National Library. They maintain this database. So like in CTRI, we have database of all clinical trials which are happening in India. In clinicaltrial.gov, you have clinical trial database of almost, you can say 220 countries data is available. And nearly 4 lakh research studies are being documented in this particular platform from all over the world. Nearly 220 countries register their clinical trials on this particular website. Okay. Now, the latest updates, what we are having is to keep a very close track of COVID research. Because as you know, nowadays, everything what we do is either directly or indirectly linked with COVID. So for example, I give you example of our Manipal, all the research projects, what we are doing nowadays. So whether we are doing in diabetes, whether we are doing in infectious disorders or cardiovascular disorders, anything, the COVID is there. Okay, indirectly or indirectly, we have to deal with this COVID and related disorders. So it's very important to track down this COVID in different ways. Not only that, even the vaccines are the hottest topic nowadays when it comes to the research part. So how many of you know that how many vaccines are under trial in the world? Anyone have any idea? Or how many vaccines are approved in India? Anyone? Anyone? How many vaccines are approved in India? Any numbers, rough numbers? Anyone can give? Okay, so we will talk on all these aspects over here. So this is a website by London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So this is one of my favorite websites for my COVID research. So this gives you a complete tracker of vaccine development all over the world. So for example, in short, I will just 1 minute. So this website gives you a vaccine landscape. So over here, you can see if I'm interested in vaccine summarization. So over here, you can see in this particular website, this is the number of vaccines which are under trial and which are already in use all over the world. So over here, you can see nearly 23 vaccinations has been approved all over the world for human use. And more than, you can say, 300 molecules are in various phases of clinical trials. So you can see the preclinical phase, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Not only that, in this particular website, you can go and actually check which all companies are doing which all clinical trials in vaccine safety. And you can get all the information over here. For example, let's see if I'm interested in Covaxin. So over here, you can see Bharat Biotech, Icmr, National Institute of Virology. So over here, you can get a complete detail about Bharat Biotech Covaxin status. So over here, you will get everything for whichever vaccines you are interested in. For example, if I'm interested in only those vaccines which are already approved. So these, you just have to select from your left-hand side, those vaccines are in use 23. So these are the vaccinations which are approved. So over here, you have Pfizer vaccinations, you go down, you will get all these clinical trials which are linked with Pfizer vaccine. Then you have Moderna. These are the clinical trials on the right-hand side. You can see these are all trials linked with Moderna for your understanding. Then you have Zydus Cadila. Zydus Cadila is getting approved. It's already approved in India, and very soon we will have in market. And then you have from China, you have Beijing, CanSino. Then you have other research institutes all over the world. So this is just for your easy understanding. So these are the new areas which, as a young researcher, you should be up to date. Always remember in this PharmD, because when you join this particular curriculum, the first thing what you have to do and start learning is that is known as evidence-based medicine. What are the best available evidence are available in the market? You have to collect that, and you have to help your physicians and your patients with the best available evidence available. So these are the resources from where you can update your knowledge, and you can help your physicians to upgrade their knowledge also. Okay, so that's very, very important. The other aspect of nowadays, what we are talking is COVID. I think many of us are already aware. Now the question comes, why as a PharmD researcher, I should be aware about COVID? Because COVID, it's not only for just means your vaccinations, taking vaccinations and all those things, getting an appointment and all. Not only that, but it is having an inbuilt AEFI reporting system that is known as adverse event following immunization. Because reporting of adverse drug reaction is also very important part of a PharmD students, because you will be learning documentation of adverse drug reaction, reporting system of adverse drug reaction, and also nowadays the newer interest is of vaccine reporting also. So COVID gives you that platform to learn how to report AEFI reporting system, adverse events following immunization. Then there is another website is ICH guidelines. So if you want to learn clinical trials, because in your curriculum you have only 1 or 2 guidelines which are in much more detail, that is E guidelines, that is good clinical practice guidelines, and one is E2A guidelines. But ICH, that is International Conference on Harmonization, it gives you a detailed picture of all the clinical trial guidelines which are there. So those who are very new to the system, so we have Q, S, E, and M. So over here you have a nearly 20 guidelines for clinical trials, that is E section. E represents the efficacy guidelines. So you can visit ICH guidelines and you can download any of these guidelines for your better understanding. Okay. So this is the aspect about your clinical trials. And so that was all about my presentation. And I will just give you some of the role and responsibility as Dr. Shivani has requested me to give you some overview and my experience, like how to approach your wards and others. Dr. Shivani, I can take some questions about the doubts and then I can explain. Is it okay? If
Okay, sir. Yeah. I'll just try unmute them. I had muted them actually.
Yes. In case if they have any doubts or any clarifications for their PharmD, I can help them out. And I will just brief them out that how the wards and what are the roles they have to play in the wards.
Okay. Students, I have unmuted. You can unmute yourselves now. You can ask the questions related to your PharmD program or anything you want to know. Sir will address your queries. If you are not able to unmute, you can post in the chat box also.
Okay, so simultaneously I will tell, okay, those who are starting their ward rounds. So one very important thing is that all of you should have a very good therapeutic knowledge. And to get the therapeutic knowledge, we have to go out of the box. Because the thing is, you will be having some of your reference books, which you're going to refer, like DiPiro is there, then Harrison is there. So therapeutic is the main subject which you have to refer for your ward rounds. Not only that, always remember whenever we go to the ward rounds, as I told you in the beginning, we are here for evidence-based medicine. The physicians which we are going to get in touch in your hospitals, they may be having around 10 to 20 years or 30 years of research experience or practicing experience. So they expect something different from you, like which you're going to tell them. Because when you only refer books, your knowledge upgradation is limited. For example, I tell you, if you must have studied about COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and there is something guidelines known as GOLD guidelines. So that is global standards are available for management of COPD. So they had come up with their 2021 guidelines. So always remember, whenever you are studying any chapter, do refer the latest guidelines. Anyone knows which are the latest guidelines which are available for tuberculosis? Anyone have any idea? For TB management, WHO has upgraded their guidelines after many years. I think almost after 2 decades, the WHO has upgraded the TB management guidelines. And there are new drugs which are available in you can say, for first-line management of tuberculosis, especially treating of MDR and XDR TB, that is multi-drug resistance and extremely drug resistance TB. And based on the WHO 2020 guidelines, Government of India in March 2021 has launched Indian TB management guidelines. So for example, when you had studied a TB chapter in your curriculum, and in case if you come across any patients in the wards, okay, with tuberculosis, So do refer these guidelines and try to update this knowledge with the physicians and try to communicate this message. So your reputation will become and your importance will be shown in the wards. And you will have a more of interactive, you can say, interactions with your physician. So knowledge upgradation and up to date is the key to success in the wards. And what I tell my student is, many times I had observed that we go morning ward rounds. For example, in Manipal, we have our routines like morning 8 to 12, we go for ward rounds. And but what happened is during this time, or when you have ward postings in your wards, so that is a time when you can just go with the physician, see what they are talking to the patients and all. But we have to change our work style. So the real learning start for a young researcher like you is in the evening hours. In case if you are having an opportunity to visit your hospital, to interact with your patients, you have to get extra time. For example, if your ward starts at morning 9 o'clock, try to go early, at least 1 or 2 hours prior to your ward starts, and try to go and update yourself with the patient latest drug charts. Try to go and use some apps which are available free of cost. In case if you require any help, I can definitely help you to get all these apps. So like, for example, you have drug interaction app, you have drug information apps. So try to do on spot everything and try to make sure when the ward round starts, you try to give this information to your physician about any changes or any observations you're coming out with. Okay. And do always remember in the wards, one very important key things you have to remember is, in case if you are not sure about any information, do not pass it until unless you are 100% sure. And always cross refer with your teacher or your guardians, whichever, or moderators which are available in your hospitals. Okay. If you are not sure, do not pass that information. Okay. And do not hesitate in cross checking that particular information. For example, the in today's world, the information is so vast and it is impossible for anyone out there to remember everything out there. Even for me also, we can't remember everything. So in case if I'm not sure about a particular information, for example, if my doctor asks me some information, I should be very openly accept that, okay, sir, I'm not sure at present, but I will cross-refer it, cross-check it, and will get back to you very soon, as early as possible. Okay, in case if you're not sure. Okay, but do not pass the wrong information, because there is some life which is involved with your information. Okay, so always cross-check and then pass on that information. The next aspect is, many times as a young researcher, what we do is, because of this practice, what we see in our routine, that many students just go to the wards and just document just for the department purpose or just for the sake of having some documents to be submitted. We have to change that trend, because always remember, the PharmD, what we are into it actually is serving the society and serving the patient. If you are able to save one life per day, the whole clinical pharmacy scenario all around the India will change. So that is the pledge we have to take, like when you pass out from here or when you actually are studying, try to do some interventions and try to give an impact. I will tell you, during my all this 15 years of my journey, I was not able to, I was means not only able to save life of my patients, but also I was able to save life of my very close family members. Okay, even including my brother also, by using my own knowledge and others. And especially during this COVID time, not only we had contributed to the hospital settings, but also to the regulatory bodies. So we have a huge scopes outside the box which we see over here. So for PharmD, the scope in India, if you ask me, it's also very high in industry. So there are many job openings which are there, like for example, for medical writers, data managements, okay, then compilators, clinical research associates, coordinators. Not only that, the pharmacovigilance industry, all the IT companies, top 10 IT companies, if you take in India, they have their own BPO, KPO division of pharmacovigilance, because they are handling data management, data safety of all these pharmaceutical companies, big companies. So you have a huge scope even in IT industries for handling these softwares. And nowadays, medical softwares are on very high rise. So even you can go into software developments with IT companies. And in pharmaceutical companies, you say you are involved in clinical trials. In India, the clinical trials are booming. Why? We have an added advantage above many other countries. One is doing clinical trials in India is cost effective when compared to the West. Okay, the cost involved is very, very less. And we have a huge amount of manpower in India, and we have a good documentation practice, and we are well versed with the guidelines what are being used in US or European nations. So that's why a lot of clinical trials are happening in India. And after COVID, okay, like nowadays we are having a newer interest for the vaccine research also. So definitely clinical research industries is on boom. Not only that, there has been recent changes which has come from the government of India and Pharmacy Council of India, which has made it mandatory for all the hospitals out there to have a clinical pharmacist. All the hospital mandatory should have a clinical pharmacist. It's already a gazette documentation, and all the big corporate hospitals and even small scale hospitals had started recruiting clinical pharmacists. So that's where the newer jobs which are coming up. And there are news that the pay scale of the pharmacist, clinical pharmacist, will be upgraded very soon at the national level. So these are the new upgrades which has come up. So a clinical pharmacist plays a vast number of roles in the hospital, starting from prescription check, okay, medication errors, adherence check, counselings, lifestyle changes, okay, compliance issues, and quality of life studies, and many other aspects. You play an important role when it comes to the patient. And also definitely you play a very important role in drug information services, poison information services, and many other. Okay, so you have to start getting trained in the beginning itself. Okay, so I think, okay, Dr. Shivani, I think we are getting some questions over here.
Yes, sir. The first one you actually just addressed, that what exactly is the role of
Okay.
clinical pharmacist.
Okay, so clinical
Um,
pharmacist, yes,
yeah.
that's what I was telling. So, but apart from these things, the clinical pharmacists do play a lot of roles, okay, in the hospitals. Like, for example, during this COVID time, I helped my clinical pharmacist out there in my hospital over here to actually prepare them, or I will say the readiness of which all drugs to be stocked up in this time of COVID by using your drug information knowledge, by screening the literatures, like which all drugs are being approved by Government of India, and telling and screening all those things list. And not only that, even comorbid conditions which are very high rise. So actually we do help our pharmacists in the hospital to upgrade their drug list. Not only that, in Manipal, I will tell you what other roles we do play is that helping our hospital pharmacies to actually check their fixed dose combinations. You will be shocked to know that nearly 150 fixed dose combination we had removed from our pharmacy shelves, which were not either approved by DCGI or CDSCO or any other regulatory body. They were just being put up irrational fixed dose combination. We had removed that as per the latest CDSCO list. So definitely we can play a very important role in these things. Not only that, we can also play a very supportive role along with the nursing staff, because nursing staff are the one which we can use actually for our training purpose also. For example, in India, we are actually not trained enough to how to give vaccinations and how to give IV lines or IV injections. But if you see in US during this pandemic time, the pharmacies in US, in chain pharmacies, they had come forward for mass vaccination drives. So in US, all these pharmacies were actually being trained to give vaccinations. So same way in India, we can start training our pharmacists to how to give injections, how to give vaccinations, which are actually a traditional role of a nurse. But still, we can start involving in all these aspects, because there is a newer need for pharmacists to get involved into all these aspects. Because of the new education policy, we have to come out of the box and start contributing more towards the society. So awareness camps in the society you can carry out. For example, smoking cessation programs you can carry out, so that we can give a lot of things to the society. Okay, and definitely in the wards, you can play a lot of roles with your patients, especially patient counseling, or I will say the pharmaceutical care plan. So always remember, what I have a belief is, if a patient knows his disease condition, okay, and if he knows what drug he's taking and how and what type of side effects the drugs can have on him, if this knowledge is there with the patient, his half disease is actually cured, because he will be better compliant, and you can actually stop the progression of the disease by giving a better pharmaceutical care to the patient. Okay, so that's where I think we have to contribute a lot. Okay, so I think the next question is, in next 4 to 5 years, what change could be expected in this field? Okay, that's very interesting question, and actually my favorite question, because I'm working on all these aspects. So as you know, the technology is now like taking very fast, and the changes which are happening at the global levels are very fast. So when we are entering into a world of 5G or 6Gs, and internets and technology is going to, you can say, automate everything. I will share one experience. I visited Singapore, I think 2 3 years back, and I visited National Institute of Singapore over there, and they have a very big hospital over there, and I visited their pharmacy over there, and I was surprised to see that there were around 40 pharmacists. There were 40, you can say, counters were available, and 40 pharmacists were sitting over there, and inside the pharmacy where the drugs are stored, there was no one. There were only robots, which were actually taking care of stocking, and the prescriptions were fed automatically by using computers, and it was fed to the robots, and the robots will pick up all the drugs, and it will put in the basket, and then it will be moved towards, you can say, the pharmacist. And the only role what the pharmacist was doing was counseling, the pharmaceutical care, which they were giving to the patients. Okay, so that is one of the changes which we can expect in India. That definitely robotics will do a very important role in how we manage our pharmacies and how we do counselings over here. Not only that, uh, in India, the biggest problem what we face is that in India we don't have a centralized digital records of our patients. So government of India recently last year has initiated that every person in India, like how we have our Aadhaar card, we will have our unique hospital ID, that and all your hospital records, all your laboratory records will be linked to that centralized number, and you can have access to your records anywhere in India. For example, the problem what we face in Manipal in our hospital is, for example, if one patient is visiting our hospital, his medical records will be saved with our, you can say, record section department for around 3 to 5 years as per the regulatory requirements. But after that time, it will be discarded. And I think it is a standard practice all over India. And but when you have your digital records, one is you can track these things very easily, and you can actually analyze these things at the national level. Like how in US, they have a centralized record system for prescriptions. So whether I take medicines from my pharmacy or community pharmacy or any pharmacies in North India or anywhere, ultimately it get recorded at a centralized place. So when you have a centralized data management of your health records or medical records, the science will have a different future in India. So I think that is what changes we expect in coming days. How we so it's known as data mining. So data mining will be very popular in coming days. Okay. I hope I answer. So robotics, technology, digitalization, these are the futures, and it's already happening. So we have to just get upgraded in this. And how to be in touch continuously with new interventions or upgrading and disease and healthcare systems. What is the source? Okay, so it's a very good question which Siddhi has asked. Okay, I will just give you a demo on this, how to update ourselves in this particular field. For example, if I am a researcher and I want to know, okay, which companies are doing in which area and where the big companies are putting money. So just understand, there are just screen top, you should know top 10 pharmaceutical companies in the world. For example, Pfizer is there, Mylan is there, and many other companies, Roche is there. So these big pharmaceutical companies pump huge amount of money into the research, and where the money goes, the research goes. So one easiest way to track where the world is going is, for example, Pfizer pipeline molecules. So the Pfizer pipeline molecule, you just have to give this keywords in Google, and you will get a list of all these molecules which are under process. For example, this is the Pfizer pipeline molecules. Over here, you can see total 94 molecules are in development phase. And if you download this particular document, it is updated on November 2021. So over here, you can see in this, the Pfizer is currently doing research in oncology, rare diseases, vaccines, infectious disorders, and others. Cancer is one of the hottest topics. So let's see cancer. So over here, you can see these are the molecules which are being under process. And over here, you can see the compound name, the mechanism which are being used for this particular, for what indication they are using it, and whether in which phase of clinical trial it is. So over here, you can identify these new molecules and you can upgrade your knowledge, because these are the things which you will not get in your, you can say, routine books. Okay. So this is how you upgrade your knowledge and try to subscribe. Like, for example, I think all of you must be using social media. So I use even social media for upgrading my knowledge. So the easiest way is like how you subscribe to some music channels or some other events which you like or dislike. So same way, what I do is for upgrading my knowledge, I do subscribe some scientific journals like JAMA, Nature, which are the top pharmaceutical journals. So even when you open your social media, you can use it for your fun, but definitely when you open these social media, when you had subscribed to these science channels or science journals, you will get the latest updates. Even if you read one sentence, you will be able to upgrade yourself. Okay, so that is the technique which I use. Even I use Google News and many other, you can say, journals I use, and these shortcuts which I use, like pipeline molecules. If it is interested to me, I'm interested in infectious disease and cancer, I definitely look into all these pipelines of top 10 pharmaceutical companies. Okay. And okay, so what salary of clinical pharmacist is expected? So it's a very good question, and it's actually mixed answers are there. The first thing is, there is, at present in India, there is no fixed salary. It all depends on your talent and how you can actually sell yourself. For example, I tell you, one of my past student, he was given an opportunity to work with Fortis hospitals in New Delhi, and he was given a lead in charge to recruit his own team, and he was earning around 50 to 60,000 as a starting package. And there are big corporate hospitals which are ready to pay you even higher amount, but only thing is you have to prove that you can bring change in their system. And once you do that, the journey starts from your, I will say, the second year itself. When you start studying therapeutics in second year, the journey starts from there. But I think most of you had started from fourth year, like postbaccalaureate, and many regular students are there in fourth year. And that's where the journey kicks on. So you have to utilize your fourth year, fifth year, and sixth year to have your clinical skills. Like, for example, drug dosage calculations, very, very important. Okay, minor managements, and getting interest in some very specific interest area like ICUs, emergency medicines, and many other areas. So develop all these skill sets. And like, for example, in US, if you talk about, you have clinical pharmacist for pediatrics, clinical pharmacist for infectious disease. So try to become super specialized in a particular domain so that you can contribute much more in that. Okay, so I think that's all for the questions.
Yes, sir, I can see another
Okay,
questions.
Shivani.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? I will be happy to help.
Participants, you have any other questions? You can raise your hands. So actually, I've covered a lot of things. So I know, and the students are very clear about yeah. So
thank you so much. I think I had crossed the time also. It's
no, sir, it's okay. Can you please stop sharing your screen?
Yes, I will just.
I need to take one. Yeah.
Okay, just a minute.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I stopped.